The carriage lurched hard to one side, and Eleanor Whitfield grabbed the leather strap above her head just to keep from falling into her own father's lap. Outside the window, torches lined a long gravel drive, and beyond them rose a house so large it looked like it had grown out of the earth rather than been built by hands. She had heard stories about Duke Alistair Vane since she was a girl. None of them were kind. Her father would not look at her. He kept his eyes on the papers in his hands, papers that had already been signed weeks ago, papers that had turned his daughter into a bride before she had ever spoken a single word to the man she was about to marry. "You will be a duchess," he said quietly, as if that fact alone should settle every fear in her chest. "Do you understand what I have given you?" "You mean what you have given him," Eleanor said. "My whole life, wrapped up like a gift, because you owe him money you cannot repay." Her father's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. The carriage rolled to a stop, and through the window Eleanor saw him. The Duke stood at the top of the stone steps, tall, still, dressed in black, watching the carriage the way a man watches weather rolling in from the coast, with caution and a strange kind of patience. She stepped down onto the gravel, and for one long moment, neither of them spoke. His eyes moved over her, not unkindly, but carefully, as though he were reading a letter he had waited a long time to receive. "Miss Whitfield," he said at last. His voice was low, controlled, the voice of a man who rarely raised it because he rarely needed to. "You are exactly as your father described." "I doubt that," Eleanor said before she could stop herself. "My father has never once described me honestly to anyone." Something flickered behind the Duke's eyes. Not anger, closer to interest. "Then perhaps," he said, "you and I understand each other already." He offered his arm. She did not take it right away. Behind her, servants unloaded her trunks, and somewhere far off, a dog barked twice and went silent. The estate loomed over all of it, dark windows catching the last orange light of evening, and Eleanor felt, for the first time in her life, entirely out of her depth. "I am not afraid of you," she said, though her voice shook slightly on the last word. The Duke almost smiled. "I never said you should be." She took his arm because there was nothing else to do, and together they walked up the long stone steps into a house that did not yet feel like home, toward a marriage that had not yet begun, but already felt as though it would change everything. Inside, the entrance hall swallowed the sound of their footsteps. Portraits lined the walls, generations of Vane ancestors staring down with the same cool composure the Duke wore now. Eleanor searched their painted faces for some clue about the man beside her, some sign of warmth passed down through the bloodline, but found none. Every face looked carved from the same unmoving stone. "You will meet the staff tomorrow," the Duke said, releasing her arm at the base of a wide staircase. "Tonight, you should rest. The journey was long." "Is that concern?" Eleanor asked, "or simply courtesy? Does it matter which?" "It matters to me." He studied her again, longer this time, and something in his expression shifted, softened at the edges, though his voice remained even. "Then let us say it is both." A servant appeared to guide her to her chambers, and Eleanor climbed the stairs without looking back, though she could feel his eyes on her the entire way. Her room was grander than any she had ever slept in. A fire already burning, heavy curtains drawn against the night, a bed large enough for 3 people. She sat at the edge of it for a long while, still in her traveling clothes, staring at the door as though the Duke himself might appear on the other side of it at any moment. He did not come, and somehow, that unsettled her more than if he had. The next morning, sunlight spilled gold across polished floors, and Eleanor woke to the quiet click of a door and a young maid setting down a tray of tea and bread. The maid's name, she would learn, was Margaret, and she had kind eyes and a habit of speaking before thinking. "You slept in the east chamber," Margaret said, arranging the curtains wider. "No bride has slept there in 11 years. Eleanor sat up slowly. 11 years. What happened 11 years ago? Margaret's face changed, just slightly, the way a door closes without quite latching. "It is not my place to say, my lady. Ask his grace, if you dare." "Why would I need to dare?" But Margaret only busied herself with the tray and said nothing more, and Eleanor understood, with a small cold feeling settling in her stomach, that she had just stepped into a house full of secrets, and that the man she was to marry was the largest secret of all. She dressed and made her way downstairs, following the sound of low voices to a study where the Duke stood by a tall window, a letter in his hand. He folded it quickly when she entered, tucking it inside his coat, and turned to face her with the same composed expression he always wore. "Miss Whitfield, you slept well, I trust." "I slept in a room no bride has used in 11 years, Eleanor said. "Perhaps you could tell me why." For the first time since she had arrived, the Duke looked genuinely caught off guard. It lasted only a moment before his expression smoothed over again, but Eleanor had seen it, and she would not forget it. "The staff talk too much," he said. "Then talk to me yourself, Your Grace. I would rather hear difficult truths from you than whispers from your servants." He crossed the room slowly, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head slightly to hold his gaze. "You are bold for a young woman who arrived here only last night. I have very little left to lose," Eleanor said. "My father has already spent my future to settle his debts. The least I can keep is my honesty." Something in his face changed again, something that looked almost like respect. "Very well," he said. "There was another wedding planned in this house, many years ago. It did not happen the way it was meant to. That is all I will say today." "That is not an answer. It is the only one you will get for now." His voice was firm, but not unkind, and Eleanor understood that pushing further would gain her nothing. Not yet. "Our wedding is in 3 days," he continued. "You will want time to prepare. My mother's gown has been kept for the right bride. I believe it may suit you. And if I refuse to wear a dead woman's gown for my own wedding?" "My mother is very much alive, Miss Whitfield," the Duke said, the faintest trace of amusement in his voice. "She simply prefers the countryside to society. You will meet her before the ceremony, I imagine, whether either of us wishes it or not." Despite herself, Eleanor almost laughed. It was the first unguarded moment between them, small as it was, and it surprised her how much she wanted more of it. The 3 days that followed moved quickly. Eleanor met with a seamstress, walked the gardens with Margaret trailing a respectful distance behind, and found herself, more than once, watching for the Duke from her window as he rode out across the fields at dawn, always alone, always returning, with the same unreadable expression on his face. On the second evening, she found him in the library, a glass of wine untouched on the table beside him, staring into the fire. "You do not sleep either," she said, stepping inside. "I sleep very little," he admitted. "It is a habit from another time." "The East Chamber, the wedding that did not happen, are they connected?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Yes." "Will you tell me the rest, eventually?" "Eventually," he said. "Not tonight." She sat across from him, closer to the fire than to the door, and for a while neither of them spoke. It was strange, she thought, how comfortable silence could feel with a man she barely knew, a man whose past clearly held something painful enough to close entire rooms of his house, and much of his heart along with them. "Why did you agree to marry me?" she finally asked. "You could have chosen any woman in the county. Why someone with a ruined family and no fortune of her own?" The Duke turned his wine glass slowly between his fingers. "Because every woman my mother introduced me to wanted the title, the house, the name. You want none of those things. I want none of this at all," Eleanor said honestly. "I know," he said, and there was something almost gentle in the way he said it. "That is precisely why I chose you." The morning of the wedding arrived with a pale gray sky and a light rain that Margaret insisted was good luck, though Eleanor privately doubted anything about this day could be called lucky. She stood in front of the mirror in the Duchess's gown, ivory silk with lace so fine it looked woven from spider's thread, and hardly recognized the woman staring back. "You look every bit a duchess," Margaret said softly. "I do not feel like one," Eleanor admitted. "I feel like a girl, standing at the edge of a cliff, wondering if anyone will catch her when she falls." "He will," Margaret said, then seemed to catch herself, pressing her lips together, as though she had said more than she meant to. "You seem very certain of a man whose past he refuses to speak of," Eleanor said. "I have served this house a long time, my lady. I know what kind of man the Duke was before, and I know what kind of man he has become. Whatever happened 11 years ago broke something in him, but it did not make him cruel, it made him careful." Eleanor turned that word over in her mind, careful, and found it fit the man she had come to know these past 3 days better than any word she might have chosen herself. Downstairs, the small chapel on the estate grounds had been filled with white flowers and candlelight, and as Eleanor walked the short aisle toward the altar, she found the Duke already waiting, standing straighter than she had ever seen him, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. There was no love between them yet, she knew that. But there was something, a current beneath the surface, unspoken and uncertain, pulling them both toward a future neither of them could fully predict. As the ceremony began, as vows were spoken and rings exchanged, Eleanor felt the weight of the moment settle over her, not as a burden, but as the closing of one chapter and the trembling, uncertain opening of another. Whatever secrets this house still held, whatever grief lived behind the Duke's composed expression, she understood now that she was no longer simply a bride bought to settle a debt. She was about to become part of his story, and she intended to know all of it, no matter how long it took, no matter what it cost her to learn the truth. Outside, the rain softened into mist, and somewhere in the depths of the great house, a door in the east wing creaked open on its own, though no one was there to hear it. Eleanor noticed the sound before anyone else did. The wedding breakfast had ended, the last of the guests had gone, and she stood near the tall windows of the drawing room in her traveling dress, watching the gray afternoon light fade into evening. A draft moved through the hall behind her, carrying with it the faint groan of old hinges somewhere above. "Did you hear that?" she asked Margaret, who was folding linens nearby. Margaret's hands stilled for only a heartbeat. "It is an old house, my lady. Old houses make old sounds." "That is the second time you have avoided answering me plainly," Eleanor said, turning to face her. "Once about the east chamber, now about a door that seems to open by itself." "They are the same door, my lady," Margaret said quietly, glancing toward the corridor as if to be certain they were alone. The room at the end of the east wing was sealed after the tragedy. His Grace ordered it left untouched. No one has gone inside in 11 years, not even to clean. "Then who opens it?" Margaret only shook her head and returned to her folding, and Eleanor understood that this was as far as the maid's courage would carry her tonight. That evening, the Duke found her standing at the base of the east wing staircase, one hand resting on the banister, looking up into darkness that no candle seemed to reach. "You should not be here," he said. His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it she had not heard before. "Then tell me why," Eleanor said, not moving. "You married me 3 hours ago, Alistair. I think I have earned the truth about the one room in this house you refused to open." It was the first time she had used his given name. She saw it land on him, saw something in his shoulders loosen just slightly, as though the sound of it from her mouth had disarmed some old, practiced defense. "My brother," he said finally. His name was Edmund. He was to be married in that room 11 years ago. His bride never arrived. What happened to her? She left him standing at the altar for another man, a man with more money and less honor. Edmund never recovered from the shame of it. Within the year, he was gone. An accident, they called it. I have never fully believed that word. Eleanor's chest tightened. "I am sorry. I do not tell you this for sympathy," the Duke said. "I tell you because you deserve to understand the house you have married into, and the man standing in front of you. I have spent 11 years guarding this family from anything that might break it further. That is why I chose carefully. That is why I chose you. And the door that opens on its own? An old latch, nothing more," he said, though his eyes did not quite agree with his own words. "The staff believe otherwise. I do not discourage the story. It keeps curious hands away from a room that should be left in peace." Eleanor studied him for a long moment. "Thank you for telling me." "Do not thank me yet," he said, something dry and almost warm creeping into his tone. "I suspect this house still has more it intends to reveal, whether either of us wishes it to or not." They climbed the main staircase together, and at the door to her chamber, he paused, his hand resting lightly against the frame. "Tonight," he said, "you will remember for the rest of your life." Eleanor lifted her chin, refusing to let her nerves show in her voice. "Prove it," she whispered. Something shifted in his expression, warmth breaking through the careful composure he wore like armor, and for the first time since she had arrived at his estate, Eleanor saw the man beneath the title, uncertain and searching in his own way, no less than she was. He did not rush her. He asked before he acted, waited before he moved, watched her face for every flicker of doubt or willingness. It was nothing like the stories she had once feared, Nothing like the cold arrangement she had dreaded during the long carriage ride to his door. It was patient. It was honest. And when the candle finally burned low, and the house settled into silence around them, Eleanor understood that whatever had broken in this family 11 years ago, something new and fragile had just begun to grow in its place. She woke before dawn to find him already sitting near the window, fully dressed, staring out at the grounds with the same distant look she had noticed on her first morning here. "You are troubled," she said, pulling a shawl around her shoulders as she joined him. "A letter arrived yesterday," he admitted. "I did not wish to speak of it before the wedding." "From whom?" "My cousin, Charles Winthrop. He believes the title should have passed to him after Edmund's death, not to me. He has never accepted that our father chose otherwise. Now that I am married, he fears an heir will end his claim entirely." "Is he dangerous?" "He is ambitious," the Duke said, which in men like Charles is often the same thing. Eleanor felt the warmth of the previous night cool slightly beneath this new weight. "Then we should be careful." "We should be together," he corrected gently. "That is the only defense that has ever mattered in this family." Over the following days, Eleanor began to settle into the rhythm of the estate, though she never stopped listening for footsteps near the east wing, never stopped watching the road for a carriage that might carry Charles Winthrop's ambitions closer to their door. She learned the names of the staff, walked the gardens each morning with Margaret, and slowly, carefully, began to learn the true shape of the man she had married, his quiet humor, his fierce loyalty, the grief he carried for a brother he could not save. One afternoon, riding out along the eastern boundary of the estate, they came upon a small stone chapel, older than the main house, half covered in ivy. "Edmund is buried here," the Duke said, dismounting. "I come once a month. I have not brought anyone with me before." Eleanor followed him inside the low iron gate, and together they stood before a modest headstone, weathered by more than a decade of rain. "I used to believe love only brought ruin to this family," the Duke said quietly. "Edmund believed in it completely, and it destroyed him. I told myself I would never make that mistake. And now?" He turned to her, something unguarded and searching in his expression. "Now I am no longer certain I was right to believe that at all." It was the closest he had come to speaking of feelings between them, and Eleanor did not push him further, understanding that trust, like everything else in this quiet, grieving house, would have to be built slowly, one honest moment at a time. That evening, a rider arrived at the estate gates, breathless, with a letter bearing Charles Winthrop's seal. The Duke read it in silence, his expression darkening with each line, before folding it and setting it on the table without a word. "What does it say?" Eleanor asked. "Charles intends to visit," he said, "within the week. He claims it is a courtesy call to congratulate us on our marriage. You do not believe that." "I have never known Charles to do anything without purpose," the Duke said, "and his purpose has always been this house." Eleanor felt the first true chill of fear since her arrival, not for herself, but for the fragile peace she had only just begun to find within these walls. Whatever Charles Winthrop wanted, she understood instinctively that it would test not only the Duke's claim to his title, but the marriage they had only just begun to build together. The days leading up to Charles's arrival passed in careful preparation. The Duke grew quieter, more watchful, spending long hours in his study reviewing old family papers, deeds, and letters from his father that Eleanor had never known existed. She often found him there late into the night, a single candle burning low, his eyes red with exhaustion, but his resolve unshaken. "You do not have to face this alone," she told him one night, setting a cup of tea beside his elbow. "I have faced every hardship in this family alone since Edmund died," he said. "It is a difficult habit to break." "Then let me help you break it," Eleanor said. "I am your wife now. Whatever comes through that door next week, it comes for both of us." He looked at her for a long moment, something in his tired eyes softening into something closer to gratitude. "You are stronger than I gave you credit for, Eleanor. You gave me very little credit at all when we first met," she reminded him, a small smile tugging at her mouth. "A mistake I do not intend to repeat." On the morning Charles Winthrop's carriage finally rolled up the long gravel drive, Eleanor stood beside her husband at the top of the stone steps, her chin lifted, her hand resting lightly but firmly on his arm. Whatever game Charles intended to play, she was determined that he would find not a vulnerable young bride easily frightened into silence, but a duchess standing firmly beside the man she had chosen to protect. no matter what secrets or schemes still waited to unfold within the walls of the house behind them. Charles Winthrop stepped down from his carriage with the easy, practiced smile of a man who believed every room he entered belonged to him. He was younger than Eleanor had expected, sharp-featured, dressed in the height of fashion, his eyes moving over the estate with open appraisal before he even greeted his hosts. "Cousin," he said warmly, though his eyes remained cool. "And this must be the new Duchess. Charming. Truly charming." "Charles," the Duke said, his voice carefully neutral, "you did not mention how long you intended to stay." "A few days. Perhaps a week." "Family matters deserve proper attention, do they not?" Charles's gaze shifted to Eleanor, lingering a moment too long. "I do hope marriage has softened my cousin's famously guarded nature, Duchess. He was always so very careful with everything he valued." "He remains careful," Eleanor said evenly. "Only now, he is not careful alone." Something flickered behind Charles's easy smile, gone as quickly as it appeared, and Eleanor understood, in that instant, that this man had underestimated her, and that his underestimation might well become her greatest advantage in whatever contest was about to unfold beneath the polite surface of afternoon tea and family courtesy. Over the following days, Charles moved through the house like a man conducting a private inventory, admiring paintings a little too closely, asking servants pointed questions, disguised as idle curiosity, and steering every conversation, however gently, toward the subject of inheritance, lineage, and the requirements of an heir. "It would be such a tragedy," he said one evening at dinner, swirling wine in his glass, "if history repeated itself in this family." Edmund's line ended so suddenly. One would hate to see the title pass through uncertain hands a second time. The Duke's grip on his own glass tightened almost imperceptibly. "The title is secure, Charles." Of course," Charles said smoothly. "I only mean to say, an heir would put every doubt to rest so quickly, wouldn't it, Duchess?" Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. "Some doubts, Mr. Winthrop, are not so easily put to rest. Ambition, for instance, tends to linger long after it has been proven unwelcome." A tense silence settled over the table, broken only when the Duke rose and suggested, with quiet finality, that the evening had grown late enough. Charles retired with his easy smile still in place, but Eleanor caught the flicker of frustration beneath it, and she knew that whatever plan he had come to enact, it had not proceeded as smoothly as he had hoped. Later that night, unable to sleep, Eleanor rose and walked the darkened corridor toward the library, hoping a book might quiet her restless mind. As she passed the east wing staircase, she froze. A thin line of candlelight glowed beneath the sealed door at the top of the stairs, the room that had remained untouched for 11 years. Her heart pounding, she climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking beneath her weight, until she reached the door and pressed her hand against the old wood. It was unlocked. Pushing it open, she found not a ghost, not an old latch swinging in a draft, but Charles Winthrop himself, kneeling before an open trunk, a stack of old letters spread across the dusty floor. "Duchess," he said, rising quickly, though his composure cracked at the edges, "you should be asleep." "You should not be in a room that has been sealed for 11 years, Eleanor said, her voice steady, despite the pounding in her chest. "What are you looking for, Charles?" He straightened, the mask of easy charm slipping fully away now, to reveal something colder underneath. "Proof," he said simply. "Proof that Edmund's death was not the accident everyone so conveniently believed it to be. Proof that might finally settle, once and for all, who truly deserves this title." Eleanor's breath caught. "You believe Alistair had something to do with his own brother's death?" "I believe," Charles said carefully, "that grief makes people do desperate things, and I intend to find out exactly what happened in this house 11 years ago, whether your husband wishes me to or not." The confrontation that followed brought the Duke rushing to the east wing at the sound of raised voices, and for a long, tense moment, the three of them stood together in the dust and candlelight of a room frozen in time, old grief and new suspicion colliding in the narrow space between truth and accusation. "Get out of this room," the Duke said, his voice low and dangerous in a way Eleanor had never heard before. "Not until I have my answers," Charles said, holding his ground. "Tell me what really happened to Edmund, cousin. Tell your new bride the truth before she learns it from someone else." The Duke's hands curled into fists at his sides, and for a moment, Eleanor feared the tension in the room might finally break into something neither of them could take back. But then, to her surprise, he exhaled slowly, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost its edge, replaced instead with a weariness that seemed to carry the full weight of 11 long years. "Edmund left a letter," he said quietly. "I found it the morning after he died. He wrote that he could not bear to go on living without the woman he believed he loved, though I have always known the truth was far more complicated than a broken heart. Our father forced that engagement upon him the same way he tried to force obligations upon me. Edmund never wanted the title. He never wanted any of this. I have kept that letter hidden all these years, because I did not want his memory reduced to a scandal, and because I could not forgive myself for staying silent, while our father pushed him toward a life he never chose." The room fell utterly still. Charles's expression shifted from triumph to something almost like shame, and Eleanor felt her own eyes fill with unexpected tears, not for the scandal Charles had hoped to uncover, but for the quiet tragedy that had shaped the man she had married long before she had ever known him. "You could have told me this the day I arrived," Eleanor said softly. "I did not yet trust anyone enough to share it," the Duke admitted. "Not until now." Charles, defeated and strangely humbled, gathered the scattered letters and returned them quietly to the trunk. "I came here seeking a scandal to use against you," he admitted. "I did not expect to find only grief." "Then perhaps," the Duke said, "you will leave this house with more understanding than ambition, cousin, for once in your life." Charles departed the following morning without ceremony, his carriage rolling away down the long gravel drive as quietly as it had arrived, and though Eleanor doubted his ambitions had been entirely extinguished, she understood that whatever threat he had posed to their marriage had, for now, been met and overcome together. In the weeks that followed, the sealed door at the end of the east wing was finally opened for good, aired out, cleaned, and filled with fresh light for the first time in over a decade. The Duke asked Eleanor to help him choose new furnishings for the room, transforming it slowly from a shrine to old grief into a quiet, sunlit study, where they often sat together in the evenings, reading side by side in comfortable silence. "I used to believe this house would always be defined by what it lost," the Duke said one evening, watching Eleanor arrange a small vase of fresh flowers on the newly polished desk. "I am beginning to believe it might instead be defined by what it finds." Eleanor smiled, crossing the room to sit beside him. "And what has it found, Your Grace?" "You," he said simply, taking her hand in his. "Though I suspect I found far more than I ever expected to, when your father's carriage first arrived at my gates." Months passed, and the estate slowly came alive, in ways it had not in over a decade. Laughter echoed through corridors that had long known only silence. Margaret often remarked to the other staff how the house itself seemed to breathe easier, as though it too had been waiting patiently for someone to finally heal the wound it had carried since Edmund's death. When word arrived that Eleanor was expecting their first child, the Duke wept openly for the first time since Edmund's funeral, not from grief this time, but from a joy so overwhelming he could hardly find words to express it. Eleanor held him close that evening, understanding at last how far they had both traveled from that first cold introduction on the gravel drive to this quiet, tender moment of shared happiness. "You once told me I would remember our wedding night forever," Eleanor said softly, resting her head against his shoulder as they watched the sunset paint the estate grounds gold. "I did not fully believe you at the time." "And now?" he asked, brushing a gentle kiss against her hair. "Now," Eleanor said, smiling as she looked up at him. "I believe I will remember every night since, forever, precisely because you finally proved it." Outside, the evening settled peacefully over the grounds, the old sealed room now filled with light, the ghosts of old grief finally laid to rest, replaced instead by the quiet, steady beginning of a family built not on cold arrangement, but on hard-won trust, patient honesty, and a love that had grown slowly, deliberately, out of the ashes of an old and painful history, into something strong enough to last for every night still yet to come. The chapel emptied slowly, guests drifting out into the mist with quiet words of congratulation, and by the time evening came, the great house had settled into a hush that felt different from any silence Eleanor had known there before. She sat at her dressing table while Margaret unpinned her hair, strand by strand, and neither of them spoke, though the air between them was thick with things unsaid. "You are trembling, my lady," Margaret finally said. I am a wife now, Eleanor answered. I did not expect the word to feel so heavy. Margaret set down the brush and met her eyes in the mirror. He is not a cruel man. Whatever fear sits in your chest tonight, know that it does not belong there, not with him. When Margaret left, closing the door softly behind her, Eleanor remained at the table a long while, watching the candle burn lower, listening to the fire crack and settle. She heard his footsteps before she heard the knock, a slow, deliberate sound in the hallway that stopped just outside her door. "Eleanor?" the Duke said, his voice low through the wood. "May I come in?" "You may," she said, surprised at how steady her own voice sounded. He entered, still dressed in his wedding clothes, though his cravat had been loosened, and his dark hair looked as though he had run a hand through it more than once. He stopped a respectful distance away, closer to the door than to her, and Eleanor understood, with a small unexpected warmth, that he had not come to claim anything. He had come to ask. "You do not have to be afraid of tonight," he said. "I am not afraid," Eleanor said, lifting her chin. "I am uncertain." "There is a difference." "Tell me the difference, then." "Fear is not knowing what will happen. Uncertainty is not knowing what I want to happen." The Duke crossed the room slowly and stopped before her, close enough that she could see the flicker of the candle reflected in his eyes. "And what do you want, Eleanor?" It was the first time he had used her given name without the formality that usually wrapped around it, and hearing it in his low voice did something strange to her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "I want to know you," she said honestly. "Not the Duke the county whispers about. Not the man my father sold me to settle his debts. I want to know the man who closed a room for 11 years and never told anyone why." He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its usual careful control. "Her name was Charlotte. She was meant to be my wife, many years ago. She died the night before our wedding, in a fall from the East Tower stairs. Some said it was an accident, some said otherwise. I have never been able to decide which frightens me more." Eleanor's breath caught. "You loved her." "I thought I did," he said. "I was young, and grief makes everything larger than it truly was. What I know now is that I have spent 11 years afraid to want anything, because the last time I did, it was taken from me, before I ever understood what I had." "And now," Eleanor asked softly, "what do you want now?" He reached out, slowly, giving her every chance to step away, and brushed a strand of hair back from her face. "I want to earn something with you that I never had the chance to earn with her. Trust. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but eventually. You'll remember this night forever," he murmured, his forehead nearly touching hers, his voice rough with something that was not quite confidence and not quite fear. "Whatever comes after it." Eleanor lifted her chin, steady despite the pounding of her own heart. "Prove it," she whispered. "Prove that tonight is the beginning of something real, and not simply another chapter in a house full of secrets." He smiled then, truly smiled, for the first time since she had arrived, and something in that smile told her that whatever came next, it would not be the transaction her father had arranged. It would be a choice, made freely, by two people who had only just begun to trust one another. They talked long into the night, of small things and large ones, of her childhood and his losses, of the strange new life stretching out ahead of them both. And when at last the candle burned to nothing and the fire dimmed to embers, Eleanor understood that a bridge had been built between them, fragile still, but real. Morning came pale and quiet. Eleanor woke to sunlight and to the unfamiliar warmth of not being alone. And for a moment, she simply lay still, listening to the steady breathing beside her, feeling the strange peace of a house that no longer felt entirely foreign. Downstairs, over a breakfast neither of them ate much of, the Duke reached across the table and took her hand. "My mother arrives today," he said. "I should warn you, she does not soften her opinions for anyone." "Then we shall get along fine," Eleanor said. "I have never been fond of softened opinions myself." The Dowager Duchess arrived at noon, in a carriage, nearly as grand as her son's estate, a sharp-eyed woman, with silver hair, pinned severely back, and a gaze that assessed Eleanor from head to foot, within seconds of stepping down. "So," the older woman said, "you are the girl who finally made my son smile again." "I am the girl he married, Your Grace," Eleanor said carefully. "Whether I have made him smile is not something I would presume to claim." The dowager's mouth twitched, the ghost of approval, honest and careful with her words. That is rarer than you might think, child. Come, walk with me. I have a great deal to tell you about this family. Things my son is too stubborn to say himself. They walked the gardens together, the dowager's cane tapping steadily against the gravel path, and slowly, piece by piece, Eleanor learned more of the house's history. Old debts, older grudges. A cousin named Edmund Caro who had long believed the title should have passed to his branch of the family, and who had never forgiven Alistair for inheriting it instead. Edmund was here the night Charlotte died, the dowager said quietly, stopping beneath a bare apple tree. I have never said this aloud to anyone, but I have never fully believed her fall was an accident. Eleanor's pulse quickened. Do you believe he was involved? I believe, the dowager said carefully, that ambition makes men do things they would otherwise never consider. And Edmund's ambition did not die with Charlotte. If anything, marrying my son off to a stranger with no fortune and no family influence may have only sharpened it. He has written to Alistair twice this month already, requesting funds he has no right to ask for. That evening, Eleanor found the Duke in his study again. A stack of letters spread across his desk, his expression darker than she had seen it since her arrival. Your mother told me about Edmund, she said, closing the door behind her. The Duke did not look up immediately. My mother worries too much. Does she? Because 3 letters requesting money in a single month does not sound like the behavior of an innocent man. He finally met her eyes, and something in his expression told her he had been carrying this weight far longer than he had let on. Edmund believes the title is rightfully his. He has believed it since we were boys. I have managed his demands for years by paying him enough to keep him quiet, but this time he is asking for more than I am willing to give. What happens if you refuse? I do not know, the Duke admitted, but I intend to find out exactly what role he played 11 years ago, before I answer him at all. Over the following days, Eleanor found herself drawn deeper into the mystery of the house, spending hours in the library searching through old correspondence, comparing dates, piecing together fragments of a story that had been buried for over a decade. She discovered old estate ledgers showing payments made to Edmund shortly after Charlotte's death, payments that had no clear explanation attached to them. This does not prove anything, the Duke said, studying the ledger she brought to him. My father may have simply been generous. Your father was not a generous man, by every account I have heard, Eleanor said. Generosity does not usually require secrecy. He studied the numbers a long while, jaw tight, and finally nodded. Then we find out the truth together. No more secrets kept from you, Eleanor. Whatever this house is hiding, we uncover it as husband and wife, not as a duke protecting his bride from things he thinks too heavy for her to carry. It was, Eleanor realized, the first time anyone in her life had treated her as an equal partner, rather than something to be managed and protected. And despite the danger clearly gathering around them, she felt something steady take root in her chest, not fear, but purpose. Their search led them, eventually, to Margaret, who had served the house long enough to remember the night Charlotte died far better than she had first let on. I was young, Margaret admitted, wringing her hands as Eleanor and the Duke sat across from her in the small parlor off the kitchens. I saw Master Edmund on the east stairs that night, well before the household was told anything had happened. I never spoke of it because I was afraid, and because no one asked. Why did you not come forward when it happened? The Duke asked, his voice tight with old grief. Because your father dismissed the matter within a day, Your Grace, and paid handsomely to ensure it stayed dismissed. A servant girl does not argue with a duke's decision, whatever she has seen with her own eyes. The pieces, slowly, began to form a picture neither Eleanor nor the Duke wanted to see clearly, yet could no longer ignore. Edmund Caro had been on the east stairs the night Charlotte died. Payments had been made to keep the matter quiet. And now, 11 years later, the same man was pressing for money again, as though he believed his silence still had a price worth paying. We need proof, Eleanor said, not suspicion, proof strong enough to bring before a magistrate, or Edmund will simply deny everything and continue as he has for a decade. The Duke's expression hardened into something Eleanor had not yet seen from him, not the careful composure of their first meeting, nor the gentleness of their wedding night, but a quiet, controlled determination. Then we will get proof, he said, whatever it costs us. Neither of them yet understood how close that search would bring them to danger, nor how much it would test the fragile trust they had only just begun to build. But as the fire burned low in the parlor that night, and Margaret slipped quietly back to her duties, Eleanor felt certain of one thing above all else. She was no longer simply a bride caught in a marriage of convenience. She had become part of a fight for the truth, standing beside a man who had finally chosen to let her stand there with him. Edmund Caro arrived at the estate 3 days later, uninvited and unannounced, his carriage rattling up the drive just as the afternoon light began to fade. Eleanor watched from an upstairs window as he stepped down, a tall man with sharp features and a smile that did not reach his eyes, and felt a chill settle over her that had nothing to do with the cold outside. "He has never come here uninvited," the Duke said grimly, joining her at the window. "Something has changed." They received him in the drawing room, formal and cold, tea poured, but untouched. Edmund's eyes moved over Eleanor with an assessing curiosity that made her skin crawl, though his words remained polished and courteous. "Your new Duchess," he said smoothly. "How fortunate for you, cousin, finding a bride willing to overlook a house with such a troubled history." "Careful, Edmund," the Duke said, his voice deceptively calm. "My wife is not a woman easily frightened by rumors." "Rumors," Edmund repeated, tasting the word. "Is that what we are calling it now?" "What would you prefer we call it?" Eleanor asked, meeting his gaze directly, refusing to let him see even a flicker of the unease coiling in her stomach. Edmund's smile thinned. "I would prefer, Your Grace, that certain matters remain buried where they belong. I trust my cousin has explained to you the arrangement that has kept this family's peace for over a decade." "He has explained a great deal," Eleanor said, "including the payments made the same week Charlotte Ashworth died. Payments made to you, Mr. Caro." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Edmund's composure slipped, just for a moment, before he gathered it again, though his eyes had turned cold. "You have been busy, little Duchess." "I have been thorough," Eleanor corrected. "There is a difference." Edmund rose slowly, straightening his coat with deliberate care. "Be careful how loudly you speak of things you do not fully understand. This house has buried secrets before. It can bury them again." The threat, thinly veiled as it was, hung in the air long after his carriage had rolled back down the drive. The Duke's hand found Eleanor's, gripping tightly. "He will not simply let this go," he said quietly. "We have shown him our hand too soon." "Then we move faster than he expects," Eleanor said, though her heart pounded with a fear she refused to let show. "We find the proof before he finds a way to silence us both." That night, unable to sleep, Eleanor slipped from her bed and made her way to the east wing, drawn by an instinct she could not fully explain. The corridor was cold and unused, dust thick along the skirting boards, portraits of the family's past hanging crooked in the dim light of her single candle. At the base of the old stone stairs, she found a small brass locket half hidden beneath loose flooring, tarnished with age, but still bearing a tiny engraved initial, C. Her hands trembled as she carried it back to the Duke's study, waking him with the discovery, watching his face pale as he turned the locket over in his palm. "This was hers," he said softly. "Charlotte's. She never went anywhere without it." "Then whoever hid it beneath those stairs knew far more about that night than they ever admitted," Eleanor said. "We are close, Alistair. Closer than Edmund realizes. But being close to the truth, they would soon discover, was far more dangerous than either of them had imagined, and the man determined to keep that truth buried was not finished fighting to protect it." 2 nights later, Eleanor woke to the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside her door, footsteps that did not belong to any servant she recognized. She rose quietly, heart pounding, and pressed her ear to the wood, catching the low murmur of voices further down the hall. The Duke's voice, tight with anger, and another voice she recognized immediately as Edmund's. She dressed quickly and slipped into the corridor, following the sound to the library, where she found the 2 men standing close, tension crackling between them like the moment before a storm breaks. "You have no proof that would hold in any court," Edmund was saying, his voice low and dangerous. "A locket, a ledger, whispers from a servant girl too frightened to speak clearly even now. Is that truly what you intend to build a case upon, cousin?" "It is enough to raise questions," the Duke said, "and questions, once asked loudly enough, tend to find their own answers." Edmund's gaze flicked to the doorway, finding Eleanor standing there, and his expression twisted into something colder than before. Your wife listens at doors, I see. A fitting habit for a woman with no fortune of her own, forced to find her worth by meddling in matters that do not concern her. Charlotte's death concerns me a great deal, Mr. Caro, Eleanor said steadily, stepping fully into the room, as does the truth of what happened to her, and what role you played in burying it. For a long moment, Edmund said nothing, his jaw working, as though weighing his next words carefully. Then, quietly, dangerously, he said, "Be very careful, both of you. This house has already lost one bride to those stairs. I would hate to see history repeat itself." He left without another word, his footsteps echoing down the corridor and out into the night, and Eleanor turned to find the Duke's face pale with a fury he was struggling to contain. "That was not a warning," he said quietly. "That was a threat." "Then we do not wait any longer," Eleanor said. "We take what we have to the magistrate tomorrow, before he has the chance to silence Margaret, or destroy what evidence remains." The Duke nodded slowly, though the fear in his eyes told Eleanor he understood, just as clearly as she did, that whatever came next would test them both in ways neither of them had yet imagined. They rode out at first light, the Duke, Eleanor, and Margaret, following behind in a second carriage, all of them silent, with the weight of what they were about to attempt. The magistrate's house sat at the edge of the nearest town, a modest building that seemed almost too ordinary to hold the power to change everything. But when they arrived, they found the door already open, papers scattered across the floor of the front room, drawers pulled from the magistrate's desk and left hanging empty. "Someone has already been here," the Duke said grimly, stepping over an overturned chair. The magistrate himself, an elderly man named Mr. Holloway, emerged from a back room, looking shaken, a fresh bruise forming along his jaw. "A man came before dawn," he said, "demanded I destroy any correspondence naming him in connection to an old matter. When I refused, he grew violent." "Edmund Caro," Eleanor said, though it was hardly a question. "He did not give his name," Holloway said, "but he wore a signet ring I recognized well enough. Caro blood runs distinct through that family." The Duke's hands curled into fists at his sides. "Then he knows we intend to bring this before the courts. He will not stop until every scrap of evidence is destroyed, and everyone who might speak against him is silenced." "Including Margaret," Eleanor said, turning sharply toward the older woman, who had gone pale beside her. They returned to the estate at speed, urgency driving the horses harder than caution allowed, but by the time they arrived, the damage had already been done. Margaret's small room off the kitchens had been ransacked, her few belongings thrown across the floor, and Margaret herself was nowhere to be found. "He has taken her," the Duke said, his voice hollow with a fear Eleanor had never heard from him before. "Or she has hidden herself," Eleanor said, refusing to accept the worst possibility. "Margaret is not foolish. She would have known the danger the moment she spoke to us honestly. She may have run rather than wait to be found." They searched the grounds through the afternoon, checking the stables, the gardener's cottage, every outbuilding scattered across the estate, until finally, as evening fell, Eleanor found her, hidden in the old chapel where the wedding had taken place only days before, curled behind the altar, trembling but unharmed. "He came for me," Margaret whispered, gripping Eleanor's hands tightly. "I heard him searching my room, and ran before he found me. My lady, he means to end this before the truth ever reaches a court." "You are safe now," Eleanor said firmly, though her own heart pounded with the knowledge that safety, in this house, had become a fragile and uncertain thing. That night, the Duke gathered every servant loyal to the household into the great hall, explaining, plainly and without softening the truth, exactly what danger they now faced. Guards were posted at every entrance. Margaret was moved to a locked room deep within the family's private quarters, and Eleanor found herself, for the first time since arriving at the estate, genuinely afraid, not of the Duke, not of the house's old secrets, but of the man who seemed willing to do anything to keep them buried. It was near midnight when the fire alarm first sounded, smoke curling thick along the east wing corridor, flames licking hungrily at old dry timber near the very stairs where Charlotte had fallen so many years before. "Edmund," the Duke said through gritted teeth, already running toward the danger rather than away from it. He means to destroy the evidence, and the house along with it. Eleanor followed close behind, choking on smoke, guiding frightened servants toward the main staircase, even as the Duke pressed deeper into the burning wing, determined to retrieve what remained of the old ledgers and correspondence hidden there. Through the haze, Eleanor caught sight of a figure near the stairs, Edmund himself, a torch still in hand, his expression twisted with a desperation that had finally overtaken whatever caution once restrained him. "You will not stop me," Edmund said, backing toward the very stairs where Charlotte had died, flames rising higher behind him. "This house has kept my secret for 11 years. It will keep it a little longer yet, buried beneath its own ashes. The truth does not burn as easily as you believe, cousin," the Duke said, stepping carefully closer despite the heat pressing against them both. "Whatever happens tonight, Holloway already has statements enough to begin an inquiry. Burning this house will not undo what has already been set in motion." Something in Edmund's expression cracked, the desperate confidence finally giving way to something rawer, more frightened. "She was going to expose the debts," he said suddenly, his voice breaking. "Charlotte discovered I had been stealing from the estate accounts for years. She threatened to tell your father everything. I only meant to stop her from speaking. I never meant for her to fall." The confession hung in the smoke-filled air, and for a moment, no one moved. Then, with a final desperate look at the flames consuming the stairs behind him, Edmund turned and fled deeper into the burning wing, vanishing into the smoke before either Eleanor or the Duke could stop him. The fire was brought under control before dawn, though the east wing was left scarred and blackened, a physical wound to match the truth finally uncovered within it. Edmund Caro was found the following morning, having fled the county entirely, though word soon reached them that he had been apprehended 2 days later attempting to board a ship bound for the continent, his confession from that night already recorded and sworn to by both the Duke and Eleanor before the magistrate. In the weeks that followed, the full truth emerged plainly. Edmund had indeed stolen heavily from the estate's accounts over many years, and Charlotte, discovering the theft, had confronted him the very night she died. Whether her fall had been a deliberate act or a desperate accident born of panic, no one could say with absolute certainty, but the payments made afterward, the years of careful silence, left little doubt that Edmund had ensured the truth remained buried for his own protection, whatever the nature of that final, fatal moment on the stairs. "She deserved better than 11 years of silence," the Duke said quietly, standing with Eleanor in the newly repaired east wing, sunlight now streaming freely through windows that had been kept shuttered for over a decade. "Thank you for helping me finally give her that. She deserved the truth," Eleanor said gently, taking his hand. "And so did you. Grief kept hidden away only grows heavier with time, Alistair. Perhaps now you can finally set it down." He turned to face her fully, something unguarded and warm in his expression that Eleanor had come to recognize as entirely his own, reserved for her alone. "I did not expect, when I agreed to this marriage, that I would find someone willing to fight so fiercely for the truth of my own house. I do not think I properly understood, until now, exactly what I had gained the night you became my wife." "You'll remember this night forever," Eleanor said softly, echoing his own words back to him, though now they carried an entirely different meaning than they had on their wedding night, not because of fear, or uncertainty, or secrets buried beneath old stairs, but because it marked the beginning of something honest between us. "Prove it," he murmured, the ghost of a smile touching his lips, an echo of her own long-ago challenge. "I already have," Eleanor said, "every day since." The months that followed brought a steady, quiet kind of happiness neither of them had expected to find so completely. The east wing was restored, the old chapel reopened for the first time in years, to hold not a funeral, but a small memorial for Charlotte, one that finally allowed the household to grieve her properly, and let her memory rest in peace rather than fear. Margaret remained in service to the house, trusted now more deeply than ever, and the Dowager Duchess visited often, delighted by the transformation she witnessed in her son with each passing season. Eleanor's father, humbled by the scandal that had nearly consumed the family he had married her into, wrote to her regularly, his letters slowly shifting from apology to genuine pride, and though their relationship would never fully heal from the wound of her arranged marriage, a fragile peace grew steadily between them. The estate itself seemed to breathe easier, sunlight reaching corners of the house that had been shadowed for over a decade, laughter returning to hallways that had long known only silence and careful guarded footsteps. Eleanor often found herself walking the gardens in the early morning, the Duke beside her, both of them speaking freely now of hopes and plans neither would have dared voice in those first uncertain days of their marriage. "I used to believe love was something dangerous," the Duke admitted one evening, as they sat together beside the fire in the library, the same room where so many difficult truths had first been spoken between them. Something that, once given, could be taken away without warning, leaving nothing behind but grief and closed doors. "And now?" Eleanor asked, resting her head against his shoulder. "Now I believe love is something built, slowly, through honesty and trust, rather than something simply given all at once and lost just as quickly. What we have built together, Eleanor, feels far sturdier than anything I once feared to lose." By the following spring, word arrived that Eleanor was expecting their first child, news that filled the great house with a warmth it had not known in generations. The Dowager Duchess wept openly upon hearing it, declaring that the house had finally found its way back to happiness after years of quiet mourning, and even Margaret, ever composed, could not hide the tears in her eyes as she embraced her young mistress. As the years passed, the story of Duke Alistair Vane and his young Duchess became one told with genuine warmth throughout the county, a tale not of scandal or tragedy, but of two people who had been thrown together by circumstance and had chosen, deliberately and courageously, to build something real from what began as nothing more than a transaction between two struggling families. Eleanor often thought back to that first carriage ride up the long gravel drive, the fear and uncertainty that had gripped her heart at the sight of the great looming house and the guarded, unreadable man waiting at its entrance. She could hardly recognize, now, the frightened girl she had been, just as the Duke rarely resembled anymore the cold, careful man she had first met. They had built, together, a marriage founded not on the debts that first bound them, nor on the secrets that had nearly destroyed them, but on a hard-won trust forged through danger, honesty, and an unwavering commitment to seek the truth no matter the cost. And whenever Eleanor thought of that first night, the words spoken between them still echoed with meaning far beyond their original intent. "You'll remember this night forever," he had told her, "and prove it," she had answered. And in every year that followed, in every quiet morning, and every challenge faced together, they continued, again and again, to prove it true.